Shoot the dog. Dr. Harlan Briggs said it the way most men order lunch. No hesitation, no emotion. He pointed at the Belgian Malinois standing guard over a dying Navy SEAL and snapped his fingers at hospital security like he was flagging down a waiter. Did I stutter? Put it down. The head of security drew his weapon. A 60-pound war dog who had survived ambushes in Kandahar, who had taken a bullet fragment in Fallujah and kept running, who had carried the scent of his wounded handler through hostile territory for 11 kilometers without stopping, was now 3 seconds from being killed on a hospital floor in San Diego by a man in a lab coat who had never heard a gunshot outside a movie theater. And the worst part? Briggs wasn't panicking. He wasn't making a desperate call. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted that SEAL to die on his table. But nobody in that room understood that yet. Nobody except one person, the nurse in the corner, the one nobody remembered hiring. Before we go on, if this story hits you the way I think it will, subscribe to this channel right now, follow this thing all the way to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now let's go. The call hit the hospital at 11:47 p.m., and everything that happened after that was war. Emily Carter was standing at the 4th floor nurses station doing discharge paperwork for a patient who had walked out 2 hours ago. That was her life at Liberty Memorial Trauma Center. 6 weeks on staff, 6 weeks of filing charts nobody read, restocking supply carts nobody thanked her for, and standing in briefings where the chief of trauma looked straight through her like she was made of glass. She was the new transfer from a VA hospital in Phoenix. The quiet one. The one who ate lunch alone in the break room and never corrected anyone when they got her name wrong. Her phone buzzed. Trauma Bay Alpha, all hands. She put the pen down, grabbed her badge, and walked. She never ran anymore. The ground floor hallway outside Trauma Alpha was already chaos. Nurses, residents, security, 2 anesthesiologists, a handful of people she had never laid eyes on, all crammed behind a strip of yellow tape like rubberneckers at a highway wreck. Emily cut through the crowd. Not a single person moved out of her way on purpose. Not a single person registered her face. She reached the glass doors and looked inside. A man on the gurney, military fatigues black with blood, face the color of wet concrete, chest barely moving, 4 poles standing around him like headstones, every line disconnected, monitors dark. Nobody had touched him, because the dog wouldn't let them. A Belgian Malinois, tan coat caked with dust and dried blood, tactical harness still buckled across his ribs, eyes scanning the room with a precision Emily had only seen in one type of creature on this earth. And it wasn't domesticated. He stood over his handler's body like a soldier standing over a fallen brother. No barking, no whimpering, no panic, just absolute, unwavering refusal. Dr. Harlan Briggs was 6 feet from the gurney with his arms folded across his chest, and the expression on his face wasn't concern. It wasn't urgency, it was irritation. The kind of irritation a man feels when his dinner reservation gets delayed. Briggs was the chief of trauma at Liberty Memorial. Tall, silver hair, magazine jaw. He had been on the cover of San Diego Medicine twice and played golf with 3 members of the hospital board. He ran this department the way a king runs a castle. And right now, a 60-pound dog was making him look powerless in front of his entire staff. He turned to Deacon, the head of security. How long? 7 minutes since medevac touched down on the roof. Dog came in with the patient. We tried separating them during transport. The dog pinned one of my guys against the elevator wall without making a sound. No growl, no bark, just moved him like furniture. It's a dog, Deacon. Sir, that dog has more combat deployments than half the people in this building. Briggs's jaw tightened. Tase it. A young resident named Dr. Sarah Kwan stepped forward fast. Dr. Briggs, the patient is in direct physical contact with the animal. A taser discharge at that proximity carries a real risk of inducing cardiac arrest. He's already in hemorrhagic shock. His heart can't take it. Briggs didn't look at her. He never looked at residents when they spoke. Then sedate the animal. We don't carry veterinary-grade sedation. Even if we improvise with ketamine, intramuscular onset in a canine that size is 8 to 12 minutes. This patient does not have 8 minutes. Now Briggs turned. He gave Quan the look he gave everyone who pushed back on him. The look that had made 3 residents transfer out of Liberty Memorial in the past year alone. Cold. Absolute. A look that said your career lives and dies at my discretion. Then we shoot the dog, he said. The room didn't go quiet. It went dead. Deacon's hand moved to his sidearm. Hold on. The voice came from the back. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it landed in that silence like a stone in still water. Emily Carter walked forward. Heads turned. Faces shifted. She watched the recognition fail to register on every single one of them. Who is she? Not curiosity. Dismissal. She was no one. A name on a schedule. A badge in a lanyard. A body filling a slot. Briggs looked at her the way he looked at everything beneath him. Who are you? Emily Carter, trauma nurse. I didn't call for a nurse. I called for a solution. Then stop creating problems. Emily kept her voice flat, measured, but something underneath it had woken up. Something old. You're about to execute a military working dog in front of a SEAL team. You see those 4 men behind the glass? They're not hospital staff. They're operators from Naval Special Warfare. They brought that man in. They are watching every single thing you do right now. That dog has a service record longer than most careers in this building. And while you're standing here debating how to kill him, his handler is dying 6 feet away from you. Briggs stepped toward her. Close. The kind of close that was designed to intimidate. You don't talk to me like that. Not in my trauma bay. Not ever. Emily didn't step back. His name is Lieutenant Commander Michael Reyes. He's a Navy SEAL. He was medevaced from a Naval Special Warfare facility less than 40 minutes ago with what looks like a gunshot wound to the upper thorax. His breathing pattern tells me he's got a tension pneumothorax. His color tells me he's lost at least 30% of his blood volume. And every second you spend protecting your ego is a second closer to him coding on your floor. So you can write me up tomorrow, but right now, either save that man or get out of my way. Silence. Briggs's face went through something. A flicker. Not shame. Men like Briggs didn't feel shame. Something more like calculation. The realization that there were witnesses. Too many of them. SEAL operators, nurses, security cameras. He said nothing. Emily turned to Deacon. Lower your weapon. Deacon looked at Briggs. Briggs didn't nod, but he didn't shake his head either. That was enough. Deacon holstered the gun. Emily pushed through the glass doors and walked into the trauma bay alone. The second she crossed that threshold, Ghost changed. Every muscle in his body tightened like a cable pulled taut. His ears flattened. His eyes locked onto her with targeting precision. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He just tracked her the way a sniper tracks a target, with patience and absolute certainty about what he would do if she crossed the line. Emily stopped 10 feet from the gurney. She could hear Reyes, wet, shallow, drowning breaths, the sound of a chest filling with pressure that had nowhere to go. She knew that sound. She had heard it in Helmand Province, kneeling in dirt beside a downed helicopter pilot while rounds snapped over her head. She had heard it at Bagram, holding a young sergeant's hand while his lung collapsed in a field hospital that smelled like diesel and copper. She looked at Ghost. Hey. Quiet, simple, like she was greeting a neighbor across a fence. I know what you're doing. You're doing your job, and I respect that more than anyone else in this building. Ghost's left ear twitched. A micro movement. Processing. But your guy's in trouble. Bad trouble. And if I don't put my hands on him in the next 60 seconds, he's going to die right here. Not in some firefight, not on some mission. Here, on this cold floor, under these lights. And you and I both know that's not how his story's supposed to end. She took one step. Ghost's body coiled. Emily stopped. She lowered herself to the ground. Slow, controlled. She sat on the cold tile and made herself small. Hands open, palms up, eyes level with his. Then she pulled up her left sleeve. On her upper arm, faded green ink against sun-browned skin. A pair of wings surrounding a star. The words, "that others may live," arched above it. The insignia of the United States Air Force 38th Rescue Squadron. Pararescue. The ones they sent when everyone else had already failed. Ghost went still, his nose extended. He leaned toward her arm and pressed his muzzle directly against the tattoo. He held it there. 1 second, 2, 3. He was reading her, not the symbol. Dogs don't read symbols. He was reading what was underneath, the scent embedded in her skin. Gunpowder, helicopter fuel, field antiseptic, sweat from nights spent hauling wounded men through terrain that didn't want them alive. It was old, faded, buried under years of civilian soap and hospital hand sanitizer. But it was there. Ghost recognized it. He sat. Behind the glass, one of the SEAL operators grabbed the arm of the man next to him. "She's PJ," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "She's one of ours." Emily looked up at Ghost. "Good boy," she whispered. "Now let me save him." She stood and moved to Reyes, 2 fingers on his carotid. Pulse weak, thready, fast. Left side of his chest wasn't moving. Trachea shifted right. Textbook tension pneumo. Air was building in his chest cavity and crushing his heart against his rib cage. She didn't turn around. She just raised her voice. 14-gauge needle, chest seal, intubation kit. Someone get me those in the next 20 seconds or I'm improvising with what's on that cart. Quan burst through the doors with a crash tray before Emily finished the sentence. The young resident's hands were shaking, but her eyes were focused. Good enough. Emily took the needle, found the second intercostal space, left side, mid-clavicular line. She had done this 17 times in her career. 14 of those times were in combat zones. She didn't count anymore. She just did it. The needle went in. Air hissed out like a tire valve releasing. Reyes's chest expanded. His color shifted from gray towards something that looked like a man who might still be alive in 5 minutes. "Pulse ox 82 and climbing," Quan called. Emily sealed the wound and taped it. "He's got internal bleeding, subclavian maybe. This bought us time, but the clock's still running. He needs an OR, now." She looked at Briggs through the glass. He was standing in the same spot, arms still crossed, face locked. But something behind his eyes had changed. Not admiration, not gratitude, something darker. Something that looked like a man whose plan had just been disrupted. "Dr. Briggs," Emily said. "OR, now." He stared at her for 2 full seconds. Then he walked to the intercom. "OR2, emergency thoracic, patient incoming." He didn't look at her when he said it. They moved Reyes fast. Emily on one side of the gurney, Quan on the other, 2 orderlies pushing. Ghost walked alongside, pressed tight against the rail, his body forming a wall between his handler and the rest of the world. Nobody tried to stop him. Nobody said a word about it. In the elevator, Emily leaned down close to Reyes's face. His eyelids were fluttering. Somewhere in there, behind the shock and the blood loss and the collapsing systems, he was still fighting. "You listen to me," she said, low enough that only he and God could hear it. "You did not survive whatever put you on that helicopter just to die in an elevator. Not tonight. Not on my watch." His fingers moved, just barely. A twitch. Reflex or response, she couldn't tell, but she chose to believe it was response. The OR team took him. Dr. Patricia Nguyen, cardiovascular, was already scrubbed and waiting. Emily transferred him onto the table, gave Nguyen a 60-second brief, and stepped back. Ghost sat at the foot of the operating table. Nguyen looked at the dog, looked at Emily, and didn't ask. She just started cutting. The doors closed. Emily stood in the hallway, alone, and now her hands shook. Not during the needle decompression, not during the standoff, not when she was staring down a war dog or a chief of trauma or the worst moment of a dying man's life. Now, in the quiet, in the aftermath, because that was how her body worked. It held everything together when it mattered and fell apart when it was safe. She pressed her back against the wall and closed her eyes, breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The same pattern she had learned in survival school 12 years ago. That's when she heard them. 2 sets of footsteps. Fast, controlled, the kind of pace that said, "We belong here, and don't you dare question it." Emily opened her eyes. 2 men, dark suits, government-issue badges clipped to breast pockets, earpieces, clean shoes. They moved through the corridor with the kind of confidence that comes from either legitimate authority or very good acting. One of them glanced at Emily as he passed. Quick, clinical, the kind of look that sorts a person into a category in less than a second. She was filed under irrelevant. They reached the nurse's station. The taller one, square jaw, close-cropped hair, spoke to the charge nurse. "We're here to collect the personal effects of the military patient brought in tonight, Lieutenant Commander Reyes. We have authorization from Naval Special Warfare Command." The charge nurse, a veteran named Donna, who had worked nights at Liberty Memorial for 19 years and did not suffer fools, looked at his badge and looked at his face. "I need to verify that with hospital administration before I release anything." "Ma'am, this is a national security matter. Verification isn't necessary. In my hospital, at my desk, at midnight, everything is necessary. Have a seat." Emily almost smiled. Almost. But she wasn't watching Donna. She was watching the second man, the shorter one. He stood a half step behind his partner, hands at his sides, and while the tall one talked, the short one scanned. Doorways, exits, camera positions, staff movements. Emily knew that scan. She had done it herself 1,000 times. It was a tactical sweep, the kind you do when you're in a space you don't control, and you're preparing for the possibility that you might need to leave in a hurry. Then the short one adjusted his jacket, left hand, right side. A movement so practiced it was almost invisible. But Emily caught it. He wasn't adjusting a badge. He wasn't reaching for a phone. He was checking a sidearm. Emily's breathing didn't change. Her face didn't move. She stayed against that wall like a piece of furniture, invisible, irrelevant, exactly what they had categorized her as. But behind her eyes, something locked into place. The same something that had locked into place in Helmand when her team's helicopter took fire. The same something that had locked into place when she realized a routine CASVAC was actually an ambush. A switch, old and familiar. A switch that said, "This isn't over." She didn't know what Michael Reyes had found. She didn't know what was on the GoPro camera she had noticed strapped to Ghost's tactical harness. She didn't know why a Navy SEAL had been medevaced with a gunshot wound from a facility on American soil. She didn't know any of that, but she knew these 2 men were wrong. The tall one's badge said Department of Defense. The font was right, the layout was right, but the lamination had a sheen she had seen before. At a document fabrication briefing during her intel cross-training at Hurlburt Field. Military ID lamination had a specific texture, a specific weight. This wasn't it. These men were not DOD. These men were not here to help. They were here to take something. And whatever that something was, it was important enough to send 2 armed men into a hospital in the middle of the night with fake credentials and rehearsed lines. Emily pushed off the wall. She walked past the nurse's station without looking at either man. She went straight to the secured storage room where patient belongings were held, badged herself in, found the bin labeled Reyes, M, and pulled Ghost's tactical harness out. The GoPro was still mounted, still recording, red light blinking. She powered it off, removed the memory card, held it between her thumb and forefinger, a piece of plastic smaller than her thumbnail, and somehow she knew, the way she had always known, the way her gut had told her things in combat that her brain caught up 2 hours later. This tiny card was the reason a Navy SEAL was bleeding out in an operating room. This was the reason someone wanted him dead. She slipped the card into the inside pocket of her scrub top, put the harness back, and walked out of the storage room. The two men were still at the nurse's station, still arguing with Donna, still performing their roles. Emily walked past them again, invisible again. Halfway down the corridor, she stopped, because from behind the closed OR doors came a sound that made the hair on her arms stand up. Ghost was growling, low, deep, a sound that started in his chest and rolled through the hallway like distant thunder. Not the defensive posture he had shown in the trauma bay. This was different. This was recognition. This was a dog who had just picked up a scent he knew from a place with no name, on a night with no moon, during a mission that never existed on any official record. Ghost knew one of those men, and that meant whatever Michael Reyes had found, whatever was on that memory card now pressing against Emily's heartbeat, it went deeper than she thought. It went all the way inside. Emily Carter stood in that hallway, between a dying SEAL and two men who wanted him to stay that way, with a piece of evidence she didn't fully understand, and a war dog who had just confirmed her worst suspicion. She was still invisible. She was still the nurse nobody respected. She was still the woman everyone overlooked. And right now, that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly be. 12:14 a.m. Emily stood outside the OR doors with the memory card pressed against her chest and Ghost's growl still vibrating through the walls. She had maybe 90 seconds before those two men in suits finished arguing with Donna and came looking for what they actually wanted. She couldn't go back to the nurse's station. She couldn't stay in this hallway, and she couldn't hand this card to anyone because she didn't know who in this hospital was safe and who wasn't. She needed to think. But thinking was a luxury she didn't have. Ghost was still growling behind the OR doors, low, steady, relentless. Not at the surgical team, not at the machines. He was growling at something only he could sense, a scent that had drifted through the ventilation system or slipped under the door gap. And it had triggered something in his training that went deeper than obedience. It was cellular, primal, a memory stored in muscle and marrow. Emily made a decision. She walked toward the staff elevator at the end of the corridor, badged herself in, and hit the button for the third floor. The pediatric wing, empty at this hour except for two nurses and a handful of sleeping children. Nobody would look for a trauma nurse on the pediatric floor at midnight. Nobody would think to check. The elevator doors closed. She exhaled. Then she pulled the memory card out and looked at it under the fluorescent light. Standard micro SD, military-grade housing, waterproof casing. Whatever Reyes had recorded on Ghost's GoPro, he had done it with equipment designed to survive everything short of a direct explosion. He wanted this footage to last. The elevator opened on 3. Emily stepped out, turned left, and nearly walked straight into a man she had never seen before. He was leaning against the wall outside the pediatric supply closet like he had been waiting there for hours. Mid-40s, civilian clothes, ball cap pulled low, but his posture was wrong for a visitor. Too controlled, too balanced, weight evenly distributed, hands visible but positioned for quick movement. Emily stopped. He looked at her. "You're Carter," he said, not a question. Emily didn't respond. Her right hand drifted toward the pocket where the card sat. "Easy," the man said. He held up both hands, palms forward. "My name is Torres, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare. I'm part of Mick's team. I was in the lobby when they brought him in." You were behind the glass, Emily said. I saw 4 men. 3. The fourth was already running surveillance on the 2 suits downstairs. We clocked them the second they walked into the building. Credentials are fake. DOD badges, wrong lamination batch. We pulled the serial numbers. Those IDs were decommissioned 8 months ago. Emily felt her pulse settle 1 notch. Only 1. Who are they? Torres dropped his hands. That's the problem. We don't know yet, but we know who sent them. A private defense contractor called Meridian Logistics. They operate under a DOD logistics umbrella, mostly transport and supply chain for overseas operations. 6 months ago, Mick's team was assigned to a routine audit of Meridian's shipping routes through Central Command. It was supposed to be paperwork, boxes and manifests, nothing hot. But it was hot, Emily said. Mick found discrepancies, container weights that didn't match cargo declarations, routing anomalies through ports that had no business handling military freight. He flagged it up the chain. His report disappeared. He flagged it again. His clearance got pulled for 72 hours. That's when he knew. Knew what? Torres looked at her for a long time. That someone above him was in on it. 12:22 a.m. Emily processed that in the space between 2 heartbeats. A SEAL officer uncovers illegal weapons movement through a defense contractor. He reports it. The report vanishes. He pushes harder. His access gets revoked. So he does what any SEAL would do when the system fails. He goes and gets the evidence himself. The GoPro, Emily said. He mounted it on Ghost's harness. Torres nodded. Mick went back to one of Meridian's stateside facilities 3 days ago. Unofficial, off the books. He brought Ghost because Ghost had been trained at that facility 2 years ago during a K9 certification program. The dog knew the layout, knew the scent signatures, knew how to move through that building without triggering security. And Reyes got the footage. He got more than footage. He got faces, names, serial numbers on crates that were supposed to be decommissioned ordnance, but were actually live weapons systems being rerouted to buyers who are very much not on our side. He recorded over 4 hours of material, and then someone spotted him. Emily closed her eyes. The gunshot wound, close range, 9mm. They tried to make it look like an accident, a security misfire during a training exercise, but Mick got to a phone. Called our team lead. We extracted him and went straight to medevac. The official story is he was injured during a training evolution at a naval special warfare compound. That's what the hospital was told. That's what the paperwork says. But that's not what happened. No, ma'am. What happened is a United States Navy SEAL was shot by private contractors on American soil for doing his job. And those 2 men downstairs are here to collect the only proof that it ever happened. Emily opened her eyes. They're not getting it. Torres studied her face. Whatever he was looking for, he found it. Chief Warrant Officer Daniels, our team lead, is making contact with NCIS and JAG right now. But it's midnight. Channels are slow. We need 2 to 3 hours before we can get federal jurisdiction involved. Until then, that footage needs to stay hidden, and the patient needs to stay alive. You think they'll try something in the hospital? I think they already did. That hit Emily like a wall. Torres kept his voice low. When Mick came in, the medevac team transmitted his vitals and injury profile to Liberty Memorial 15 minutes before landing. Standard protocol. The trauma team should have been prepped and ready. Full crash setup, blood products on standby, surgical team alerted. None of that happened, Emily said. When I got to the trauma bay, nothing was set up. Monitors were off. IV lines weren't connected. It looked like nobody had prepared at all. Exactly. Briggs, Emily said. Torres didn't blink. Dr. Harlan Briggs received a phone call at 11:31 p.m. tonight, 16 minutes before the medevac landed. The call lasted 4 minutes. It came from a number registered to a communications firm that is a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Logistics. Emily felt the hallway shrink around her. He was told Reyes was coming. He was told more than that. He was told to make sure the patient didn't make it off the table. 12:29 a.m. Everything Emily thought she understood about the last hour rebuilt itself from the ground up. Briggs ordering the dog shot. Briggs refusing to prep the trauma bay. Briggs dismissing every suggestion, overruling every protocol, wasting every second while a man's lung collapsed and his blood pressure dropped and his heart fought to keep beating. None of it was incompetence. It was deliberate. Harlan Briggs, chief of trauma at Liberty Memorial, had been paid to let Michael Reyes die. "Where is Briggs now?" Emily asked. "Last we saw, he was in his office on the second floor. He's been on his phone since Reyes went into surgery. We think he's reporting to his contact that the patient survived the trauma bay. If Reyes is in the OR, he's vulnerable. Briggs has access to the surgical floor. He could walk in, question a drug dosage, override a protocol. He could kill him without ever touching a scalpel." Torres shook his head. "Dr. Nguyen won't let him near that room. She locked the OR the moment she started operating. Badge access only. We've got one of our guys stationed at the door disguised as a hospital orderly. And the two suits? Still downstairs. They're getting impatient. Donna's been stalling them, but she can't hold forever. Eventually they'll escalate. Flash something that looks real enough for hospital admin to override her." Emily pulled the memory card from her pocket and held it up. "This is what they want. 4 hours of footage proving that Meridian Logistics is running an illegal weapons pipeline on American soil using military shipping channels. This is what Reyes almost died for. If they get it, it disappears. The investigation dies. The people responsible walk. And Reyes becomes a training accident statistic that nobody ever questions." Torres looked at the card. "Where do we put it?" "Nowhere they'd look." Emily turned and walked down the pediatric hallway. Torres followed. She stopped at a room marked Family Consultation C, a small, windowless space with a table, 4 chairs, and a television mounted on the wall. She pulled the TV away from the wall, found the USB service port on the back panel, and slid the memory card into a slot behind the input panel where maintenance techs stored firmware updates. She pushed the TV back flush against the wall. "Nobody uses this room at night," she said, "and nobody's pulling a wall-mounted TV apart in a pediatric ward to search for a micro SD card." Torres almost smiled. "Almost. You've done this before. I've hidden things that needed hiding before. Different context. Same principle." 12:38 a.m. They went back to the elevator. Torres headed down to rejoin his team. Emily went to the second floor. She didn't plan what she was going to do next. She didn't rehearse it. She just walked off the elevator and turned toward the administrative wing and found herself standing in front of Dr. Harlan Briggs's office door. It was open. The light was on. Briggs was sitting behind his desk with his phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking low and fast, the way people speak when they're giving a report to someone they're afraid of. Emily knocked on the doorframe. Briggs looked up. His face went through 3 things in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, and then something colder, wariness. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, and set it face down on the desk. "What do you want, Carter?" Emily stepped into the office. "I wanted to let you know that Lieutenant Commander Reyes is stable. Dr. Nguyen is closing now. He's going to make it." She watched his reaction. A man who had just fought to save a patient's life would show relief, exhaustion, maybe even a flash of satisfaction. Briggs showed none of those things. What crossed his face was a micro-expression so fast that most people would have missed it entirely. But Emily had been trained to read faces at 200 meters through rifle optics. She had been trained to detect stress indicators in hostile contacts during interrogation assists. She had spent 3 years reading the human face under the worst conditions on Earth. What she saw on Harlan Briggs's face for 1/5 of a second was frustration. He was frustrated that Reyes was going to live. "Good," Briggs said. The word came out flat, mechanical. That's good news. Thank you for letting me know. Of course. Emily paused. I also wanted to say that I'm sorry about how I spoke to you in the trauma bay. It was unprofessional. I was caught up in the moment. Briggs leaned back. She could see his shoulders drop. He was buying it. Trauma situations are high stress. People say things they don't mean. They do, Emily agreed. I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page going forward. I know how important your leadership is to this department. Briggs almost softened. Almost. I appreciate that, Carter. Really? Emily nodded and turned toward the door. Then she stopped as if a thought had just occurred to her. Oh, one more thing. There were 2 men downstairs asking about the patient's personal effects. Department of Defense, they said. Do you know anything about that? She didn't turn around. She asked the question facing the doorway, but she was watching his reflection in the glass partition to his left. Briggs's hand moved, involuntary, toward his phone. Then it stopped. No, he said. I don't know anything about that. Okay, just thought I'd ask. Good night, Dr. Briggs. She walked out. Her heart was slamming so hard she could feel it in her teeth, but her face showed nothing. Her pace showed nothing. She walked down the hall and around the corner and into the stairwell, and only then did she press both palms flat against the cold concrete wall and let herself breathe. He was lying. She knew it with the same certainty she knew her own name. When she mentioned the 2 men, his hand had gone for the phone. Reflex. The same reflex a handler has when a mission variable changes and they need to update command. Briggs wasn't just compromised. He was active. He was coordinating. He was in real-time communication with whoever had sent those men. And now he knew that Emily was asking questions, which meant her window of being invisible had just closed. 12:51 a.m. Emily came down the stairwell to the ground floor and immediately saw that the situation had changed. Donna was no longer at the nurses' station. A hospital administrator named Phillips, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a permanent expression of bureaucratic compliance, was standing behind the desk with a clipboard and a look of someone who had been woken up and told to make a problem go away. The 2 suited men were standing in front of him. The tall one was talking. Phillips was nodding. Emily slowed her pace. Phillips picked up a phone, dialed an extension, and spoke briefly. Then he hung up and said to the tall man, I'll escort you to the secured storage area myself. Emily's stomach dropped. They were getting access. Whatever Donna had built, as they would know someone in this hospital was working against them, and the search would intensify from quiet to violent in a matter of minutes. Emily pulled out her phone and sent a text to a number Torres had given her in the pediatric hallway. 2 words. They're in. 12 seconds later, her phone buzzed back. Copy, stall. Stall, 1 word. Like it was simple. Like she could just walk up to 2 armed men with fake federal IDs and ask them to wait. But Emily Carter had spent 4 years in combat zones where stalling wasn't a strategy, it was survival. You stalled when the extraction bird was 8 minutes out and you had 4 minutes of ammunition left. You stalled when a wounded man couldn't be moved and the ground was closing in. You stalled with words when weapons were empty and options were gone. She had stalled death more times than she could count. She could stall 2 men in suits. Emily walked straight to the storage room door and arrived just as Phillips was reaching for his access badge. She stepped in front of him. Mr. Phillips, I need to flag a chain of custody issue with the items in this room. Phillips blinked. Excuse me? The patient who was brought in tonight is an active duty military officer under the jurisdiction of Naval Special Warfare Command. His personal effects are subject to military evidence protocols under Title 10. Any release of those items requires co-authorization from the attending physician and the patient's commanding officer. I flagged this with the charge nurse earlier tonight. Phillips stared at her. The tall, suited man stared at her. The short one shifted his weight, just slightly, left foot back, a fighting stance disguised as impatience. I'm not aware of any such flag, Phillips said. Check with Donna, she logged it before she went on break. Donna didn't mention anything to me. Then I'd suggest you call her before you open that door. Because if you release military evidence to unauthorized personnel without proper co-authorization, the liability falls on the hospital. On you specifically, Mr. Phillips, as the administrator who approved access. Phillips's face went pale. Liability was the magic word in hospital administration. It was the word that made people stop and reconsider and call their lawyers. He turned to the suited men. I'm going to need to verify this. It shouldn't take long. The tall one's jaw tightened. We've been here for over an hour, and I appreciate your patience. Please wait in the lobby. Emily watched them walk back toward the main corridor. The short one looked at her as he passed. This time, the look was different. Not dismissive, not categorizing, calculating. He was going to remember her face. 12:58 a.m. Emily leaned against the wall outside the storage room and felt the minutes stretch like wire. Every second was a second closer to Torres making contact with NCIS. Every second was also a second closer to those men figuring out that the card was gone, that Briggs's failure in the trauma bay wasn't an accident, and that someone inside this hospital was actively protecting both the patient and the evidence. Her phone buzzed. Torres. Nguyen is closing. Reyes stable. NCIS contact established. ETA for agents, 90 minutes. 90 minutes. An eternity. Emily typed back, Briggs is compromised. Confirmed. He's communicating with their side in real time. He knows I'm involved. The response came in 4 seconds. Get somewhere safe. We'll handle Briggs. Emily almost laughed. Somewhere safe. In a hospital where the chief of trauma was trying to kill a patient, and 2 armed men were hunting for evidence, and the only person standing between them and success was a nurse who hadn't worn a uniform in 5 years. There was no safe. There was only forward. She pushed off the wall and walked back toward the elevator. She was going to check on Ghost. She was going to sit outside that OR, and she was going to wait. Because if Briggs made a move toward that operating room, he would have to go through her first. And Emily Carter, the woman nobody respected, the nurse everybody overlooked, the transfer that the chief of trauma treated like furniture, had once pulled a 200-pound Marine out of a burning vehicle with both hands and a dislocated shoulder, and had not stopped moving until he was breathing again on the other side. She was not furniture. She had never been furniture. The elevator opened on the surgical floor. She stepped out. Ghost was lying in front of the OR doors. His head was up, his ears were forward, and his eyes were locked on the far end of the hallway where a figure in a white coat had just stepped off the opposite elevator. Dr. Harlan Briggs. He was carrying a syringe. Emily stopped walking. Briggs stopped walking. They stood at opposite ends of that hallway with a war dog between them and the body of a Navy SEAL behind a locked door. And for one long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Ghost rose to his feet, and this time he didn't growl. He bared his teeth. 1:03 a.m. Briggs didn't move. The syringe was in his right hand, held low against his thigh like he thought he could hide it. But Emily had already seen it, and Ghost had already smelled it. Whatever was in that syringe, it wasn't medicine, not the kind meant to heal. Emily took one step forward. Dr. Briggs. He flinched. A small thing. A twitch in the shoulder that most people would never notice. But Emily noticed everything tonight. Every micro movement, every shift in weight, every breath that came half a second too fast. Carter, what are you doing up here? Checking on the patient. What are you doing up here? Briggs glanced at the syringe in his hand, then back at her. Post-surgical orders. Dr. Nguyen requested supplemental sedation for the patient. Dr. Nguyen is still in surgery. The OR is locked. She hasn't requested anything. The hallway stretched between them like a wire pulled tight. Ghost stood in the middle, teeth still bared, body angled toward Briggs with a kind of locked focus that said, "One wrong move, and I will put you on the ground before your next heartbeat." Briggs tried to smile. It didn't work. "Emily, I think you're overtired. It's been a long night. Why don't you go back to the nurse's station and let me handle the post-op protocols?" "Put the syringe down." "Excuse me?" "Put it down, on the floor, right now." Briggs's face changed. The mask he wore, the polished, authoritative, magazine cover mask, cracked down the middle. What was underneath wasn't a doctor. It wasn't a leader. It was a man backed into a corner who had just realized that the person standing between him and what he needed to do was not going to move. "You're a nurse, Carter. You don't give me orders. And you're a man holding an unlabeled syringe on a surgical floor at 1 in the morning after failing to prep a trauma bay for a dying patient. I don't need to give you orders. I just need to stand here long enough for you to explain that to the people who are coming." Briggs's eyes narrowed. "What people?" Emily held up her phone. The screen showed the text thread with Torres. She didn't let him read it. She just let him see that it existed. "Naval Criminal Investigative Service. They've been contacted. They're en route. And everything that's happened in this hospital tonight is going to be reviewed. Every decision you made, every call you took, every second you wasted in that trauma bay while a man was dying." Something broke behind Briggs's eyes. Not courage. He had never had real courage. What broke was the calculation. The math he had been running all night, the odds of getting away with it, the probability of walking out of this clean. That math had just changed. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice had thinned. The authority was leaking out of it like air from a punctured tire. "I know that you received a phone call at 11:31 tonight from a number linked to Meridian Logistics. I know that you deliberately failed to prepare the trauma bay for a patient whose vitals were transmitted 15 minutes before arrival. I know that you ordered a military working dog killed, not because it was a threat, but because you needed more time. More time for that man to bleed out. More time for his lung to collapse. More time for his heart to stop. Because someone paid you to make sure that happened." Briggs's hand tightened on the syringe. Ghost lowered his head. The growl that came out of him was subsonic. You didn't hear it so much as feel it in your chest. A vibration that said, "I am not warning you anymore. I am telling you what comes next." "You're insane," Briggs said. "You're a burned-out transfer nurse with a hero complex, and you're going to destroy your career over a conspiracy theory. Maybe, but you're the one holding a syringe you can't explain." 1:07 a.m. The SEAL operator disguised as a hospital orderly appeared at the far end of the hallway behind Briggs. Emily saw him. Briggs didn't. The man moved like water, silent and precise, closing the distance with the kind of controlled speed that made Emily's training instincts fire in recognition. Briggs must have felt something, a shift in the air, an instinct buried so deep it predated language, because he turned. The operator was 10 feet behind him. "Dr. Briggs," the operator said. His voice was calm, the way a loaded weapon is calm. "My name is Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb. I'm going to need you to set that syringe on the floor and step back against the wall." Briggs looked at Webb, looked at Emily, looked at Ghost. 3 directions, no exit. "This is a hospital," Briggs said. "You have no authority here." "You're right, I don't, but that dog does. And right now he's about 2 seconds from making authority irrelevant. So I'm going to ask you one more time, put it down." Briggs's hand was shaking. The syringe trembled between his fingers. For one terrible second, Emily thought he might lunge. Toward the OR doors, toward Reyes. One last desperate attempt to finish what he had been paid to do. Ghost read it before anyone else did. The dog moved. Not a charge, not an attack. He simply repositioned himself directly in front of the OR doors, blocking them entirely with his body. It was tactical, precise, the kind of movement that doesn't come from instinct alone, but from hundreds of hours of training that had been burned into his nervous system until it became as natural as breathing. Briggs had nowhere to go. He set the syringe on the floor. Webb stepped forward, picked it up, and capped it. He looked at the liquid inside. Clear, colorless. He smelled it. His face hardened. Potassium chloride, Webb said. Concentrated. Enough to stop a heart in under 60 seconds. Emily felt the floor shift beneath her. She had suspected. She had known, on some level, what Briggs was carrying and what he intended to do. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the name of the drug that would have killed Michael Reyes on an operating table in a hospital in San Diego, California, while a surgeon fought to save his life, it hit different. It hit like a fist. Cuff him? Webb asked, looking at Emily. We can't. No legal authority. Not yet. But he doesn't leave this floor. Webb nodded. He took Briggs by the arm and walked him to the far end of the hallway, where he sat him in a chair outside the staff break room. Briggs went without resistance. The fight had gone out of him the moment the syringe left his hand. He sat with his elbows on his knees and his head down, and he looked, for the first time all night, exactly like what he was. A small man who had traded everything he was supposed to be for money. Emily picked up her phone and called Torres. He answered on the first ring. What happened? Briggs just tried to access the OR with a syringe of concentrated potassium chloride. Webb intercepted him. Briggs is contained on the surgical floor. How long until NCIS gets here? 65 minutes, maybe less. They're scrambling a team from the Naval Base San Diego field office. We don't have 65 minutes. The two men downstairs are going to escalate. Phillips gave them preliminary access before I stalled him. When they get into that storage room and find the memory card missing, they'll know someone inside the hospital took it. They'll start searching, and they're armed. Torres was quiet for 3 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped into a register Emily recognized. Mission planning. How many civilians on the ground floor right now? Minimal. Night shift skeleton crew. Maybe 8 to 10 staff. A few patients in the ER waiting area. Can you get them moved? Not without raising alarms. Then we contain the two suits without a confrontation. Keep them in a controlled space where they can't reach the patient or the evidence. We've got 3 operators in the building. 1 with you, 2 downstairs. And me. Carter, you've already done more than anyone could have asked. I'm not asking for permission, Torres. I'm telling you I'm in this. Those men are going to come looking. And when they do, they're going to come to the one floor where everything they want is located. The patient, the evidence, the dog. It all converges here. So either use me or get out of my way. But do not tell me to go sit in a break room. Torres paused. Then something that might have been respect entered his voice. Copy that. What do you need? I need you to make sure Phillips doesn't give them access to the storage room. Buy me 20 more minutes. After that, it won't matter. Why 20 minutes? Because in 20 minutes, Dr. Nguyen finishes surgery, Reyes gets moved to recovery, and I can lock this floor down with a medical emergency protocol that even a hospital administrator can't override. 1:19 a.m. Emily hung up and walked back to the OR doors. Ghost was still there, still guarding, still doing the only thing he knew how to do, which was protect the man behind that door with every breath in his body. She sat down on the floor next to him, not because she needed to rest, because she needed him to know she was there. She was part of the perimeter now. She was inside the circle. Ghost looked at her. His eyes were different than they had been in the trauma bay. Less intensity, more recognition. He had accepted her not as a stranger and not as a threat, but as something rarer, an ally. Someone who had proven, through action and instinct and a faded tattoo on sun-browned skin, that she would stand in the same fire and not run. He leaned into her, pressed his shoulder against her arm. 70 pounds of muscle and loyalty and war, resting against a nurse who had spent 6 weeks being invisible. I know, buddy, she whispered. We're almost there. Her phone buzzed. Torres. Suits are moving. They just left the lobby, heading toward the stairwell. My guys are tracking but can't engage. Emily stood up. Which stairwell? East. They're coming up. The surgical floor had two access points, the elevator bank on the west side and the east stairwell. Webb had Briggs contained near the break room on the west end. The east stairwell opened directly into the corridor that led to the OR. Emily looked at Ghost. Stay here. Don't move. Ghost held her gaze for 1 second. Then he turned back to the OR doors and sat. Emily walked to the east stairwell door. She could hear footsteps, controlled, steady, 2 sets, coming up fast. She had no weapon. She had no authority. She had no backup closer than 50 feet. She had a badge, a phone, and 4 years of training that most people in this hospital would never believe existed. The door opened. The short-suited man came through first. He saw Emily and stopped. The tall one was right behind him. This floor is restricted, Emily said. Surgical patients only. No visitors after hours without physician authorization. The tall one smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes. We have authorization. We spoke with hospital administration. Administration doesn't control surgical floor access. The attending surgeon does. And Dr. Nguyen is currently in the operating room and has not authorized any visitors. We're not visitors. We're federal investigators. Then you'll have credentials that can be verified through the Department of Defense authentication line. I'll be happy to call it for you right now. Emily held up her phone. It takes about 10 minutes. The overnight duty officer at the Pentagon verifies badge serial numbers against the active database. Shall I dial? The tall man's smile vanished. The short one stepped forward. He was close now. Close enough that Emily could see the slight bulge under his left jacket panel. Close enough that she could smell his aftershave, sharp and chemical, the kind of scent that clings to a man who got dressed in a hurry. Nurse, he said. His voice was different from his partner's, quieter, more dangerous. We've been very patient tonight, but our patience has a limit. We need access to this floor, and we need it now. You can either step aside, or we can have the hospital's chief of staff remove you. The chief of staff isn't here, won't be until 7 a.m., and the chief of trauma, Dr. Briggs, is currently being detained on this floor for attempting to enter the operating room with an unlabeled controlled substance. So you're running out of friends in this building. The short man's face went blank. Not surprised. Processing. Recalculating. Emily watched it happen in real time. The moment he understood that the operation he had been sent to execute was falling apart, that the nurse standing in front of him wasn't a random obstacle, but an active threat, and that the man who was supposed to ensure the patient's death had already failed. He reached into his jacket. Emily didn't flinch. There are 4 security cameras on this floor. You're being recorded right now, and if you pull a weapon in a hospital, on a surgical floor, with patients in the OR and staff as witnesses, you will never walk out of this building as a free man. Not tonight, not ever. His hand stopped. 1:31 a.m. The tall man put his hand on his partner's shoulder. Let's go. The short one didn't move. He was still looking at Emily, reading her, trying to figure out what she was, because she didn't fit any category he had been briefed on. She wasn't security. She wasn't military. Not anymore. She wasn't law enforcement. She was a nurse in scrubs with a hospital badge and a face that said, I have stood in front of worse things than you, and I am still standing. Let's go, the tall one repeated, harder this time. The short man smiled, a different smile than his partner's. This one was a promise, a smile that said, I will remember you, and this is not over. And when the cameras aren't watching, things will be different. He stepped back. They turned. They went through the stairwell door and it closed behind them. Emily leaned against the wall and pressed her hand over her heart. It was hammering. It had been hammering the entire time, but her face hadn't shown it and her voice hadn't carried it because she had learned a long time ago, in a place much worse than this, that fear is only lethal when other people can see it. Her phone buzzed. Torres. They're heading back down, east stairwell. My guys have eyes on them. They're moving toward the parking structure. They're not leaving, Emily said. They're regrouping. Agreed. NCIS is 40 minutes out. 40 minutes. An ocean of time. Emily walked back to the OR. Ghost was exactly where she had left him. Webb was still with Briggs at the far end of the hall. The corridor was quiet, but the quiet felt wrong. Pressurized. Like the air before a thunderstorm. She sat down next to Ghost again. He pressed against her immediately, and she realized his heartbeat was elevated. He had heard the voices in the stairwell. He had known. 40 minutes, buddy, she said. That's all we need. 1:38 a.m. The OR doors opened. Dr. Patricia Nguyen stepped out, surgical cap still on, gloves stripped off, and a look on her face that Emily recognized. The look of a surgeon who had just fought for a life and won, but knew the fight wasn't over. He's stable, Nguyen said. Torn subclavian artery. We repaired it, removed 2 bullet fragments from the thoracic cavity. He lost a lot of blood, but we got ahead of it. He's going to need time, but he'll live. Emily closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough to let that sentence land. He'll live. 2 words. The only 2 words that mattered in this entire night. Nguyen looked down at Ghost. The dog didn't move the entire time. 4 hours. Not an inch. I've never seen anything like it. He's doing his job, Emily said. Nguyen looked at her. So are you, from what I'm hearing. Webb told me about Briggs, about the syringe. We need to move Reyes to a recovery room that we can secure. Single access point, no windows, badge-only entry. And I need you to initiate a medical emergency protocol for this floor. Nguyen raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Compromised medication chain. Briggs was carrying potassium chloride that didn't come from the hospital pharmacy. That means either someone inside the pharmacy is involved or an outside agent smuggled a lethal substance onto the surgical floor. Either way, it's a credible threat to patient safety. That gives you authority to lock down this entire floor under emergency protocol until a full review is completed. Nguyen stared at her. You thought this through. I've had time. How long do you need the lockdown to hold? 35 minutes. Nguyen pulled out her phone and called hospital security. This is Dr. Nguyen, attending surgeon, ID number 7742. I'm initiating a medical emergency protocol for the surgical floor, effective immediately. Compromised pharmaceutical chain. All access points are to be secured. Badge-only entry. Physician authorization required. No exceptions until I personally rescind the order. She hung up and looked at Emily. 35 minutes, not a second more. That's all I need. 1:44 a.m. They moved Reyes to recovery room 6. Single door. No exterior windows. 1 air vent too small for a person. Webb stood outside. Ghost walked alongside the gurney, pressed against the rail, exactly as he had done hours earlier. When they got Reyes settled, Emily checked his vitals. Heart rate stabilizing, blood pressure climbing, oxygen saturation holding at 96. He was sedated, but his body was fighting back. His body was winning. She stood over him and looked at his face. Young, younger than she expected. 32, maybe 33, sun-weathered skin. A scar along his jawline that spoke of a story she would probably never hear. Hands calloused in the specific way that comes from years of gripping weapons and ropes and the edges of helicopters in the dark. This man had gone looking for the truth. He had found it, and someone had tried to kill him for it. Not in a foreign country, not on a battlefield, on American soil, in a facility run by Americans. For money. Ghost jumped onto the foot of the bed. Nobody stopped him. He curled into a tight ball at Reyes's feet, tucked his nose under his tail, and kept his eyes open, watching the door, always watching the door. Emily pulled up a chair and sat between the bed and the entrance. She had no weapon. She had no training for this specific scenario. She had a chair, a door, and a dog. It would have to be enough. 1:52 a.m. The floor was locked. Webb had Briggs. Torres and two operators were downstairs monitoring the suited men who had retreated to the parking structure. NCIS was 23 minutes out. The math was starting to work. For the first time since 11:47 p.m., Emily allowed herself to think that they might actually make it. Then her phone buzzed with a message from Torres that turned her blood to ice. "Third man, we missed one. He entered through the ambulance bay 6 minutes ago. Hospital scrubs, fake staff badge. He's inside, we don't know where." Emily read it twice, 3 times. A third man, not in a suit, not at the front door, through the ambulance bay, in scrubs, blending in with the night shift staff like a ghost, like someone who had done this before. She looked at Ghost. His head was up. His ears were rotating. He had caught something that the humans in the building couldn't detect. A scent, a frequency, a vibration carried through the air ducts from somewhere below. "You know, don't you?" Emily whispered. Ghost's lips pulled back from his teeth. Not a growl, a confirmation. The third man was coming. Emily stood up from the chair. She moved to the door and looked through the narrow window into the hallway. Empty. Webb was at his post, 30 feet to the left. The corridor stretched to the right toward the locked stairwell access. The emergency protocol had sealed the floor. Badge-only entry, physician authorization, no exceptions. But this man was wearing scrubs, and if he had a clone badge, if someone inside the hospital had provided him access before the lockdown went into effect, he was already past the perimeter. He was already on this floor. Emily's hand went to the door handle. She turned the deadbolt. It clicked. A small sound, the smallest sound in the world. But in that moment, it was the loudest thing Emily had ever heard. She stepped back from the door. Ghost was standing on the bed now, all 4 paws planted, head low, ears flat, every muscle in his body drawn tight like a bowstring at full pull. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking at the air vent above it. And from somewhere deep inside the ventilation shaft, Emily heard a sound that made every hair on her body stand up. Breathing. Someone was in the walls. Emily grabbed the chair and swung it up, wedging it under the door handle. She pulled Reyes's bed away from the wall. She positioned herself between the vent and the patient, and she looked at Ghost and she said one word. Guard. Ghost leaped off the bed and landed between Emily and the vent with the silence of a predator who had hunted in darkness his entire life. The breathing stopped. Then the vent cover moved. 2:01 a.m. The screws on the vent cover turned. Slowly. One by one. Someone on the other side had a tool. Small, precise, the kind of thing you could carry in a pocket and use without sound. Emily grabbed her phone, typed to Torres. Third man, recovery room 6 vent. He's coming through now. She didn't wait for a response. She backed up until she was standing directly over Reyes's body. If this man came through that vent, he would have to go through Ghost first. And if he got past Ghost, he would have to go through her. The last screw fell. The vent cover swung open. A hand appeared, gloved, black, tactical. Ghost launched. 60 pounds of combat-trained Belgian Malinois hit the opening of that vent shaft like a missile. His jaws clamped onto the gloved hand, and he twisted his body with a violence that was both terrifying and precise. A scream echoed through the shaft. Not loud, strangled. The sound of a man who had trained himself not to make noise, but whose body had betrayed him. Ghost pulled. The man's arm came through the vent, then his shoulder. He was stuck, half in, half out, one arm locked in the jaws of a dog who had no intention of letting go. Emily moved fast. She grabbed the man's exposed wrist, the one Ghost wasn't holding, and twisted it behind his back with a joint lock she hadn't used in 5 years, but her muscles remembered like it was yesterday. The man thrashed. Emily held. Ghost held. Webb's voice came from outside the door. "Carter? What's happening in there? Get in here, now!" Webb hit the door. The chair held it for a second. He hit it again. The chair skidded. The door flew open. Webb took one look at the scene and moved. He grabbed the man by the back of his scrub top and hauled him out of the vent like pulling a fish from a pipe. The man hit the floor. Webb was on top of him in a second, knee in his back, arm pinned. Ghost released the hand. Blood dripped from his teeth. The man on the floor turned his head. Emily saw his face, and Ghost went absolutely still. Not aggressive, not defensive, still. The kind of still that comes from recognition so deep it bypasses every trained behavior and goes straight to memory. Ghost knew this man. Emily saw it in the dog's eyes. A flicker of something that wasn't rage, something older, something that looked almost like betrayal. "Who is he?" Emily asked Webb. Webb rolled the man over, checked his pockets, found a phone, a cloned hospital badge, and a military ID, a real one this time. Webb read the name and his face went white. Chief Petty Officer Dale Renner, former K-9 handler, Naval Special Warfare. He was Ghost's first handler, before Reyes. Emily looked at the man on the floor. He was breathing hard. Blood from Ghost's bite was soaking through his glove. His eyes were locked on the dog who had just attacked him. The dog he had once trained. The dog who had trusted him before he became whatever he was now. "He was part of the K-9 program at Meridian's facility," Webb said. "He left the Navy 2 years ago. We thought he went private sector." "He did," Emily said, "just not the sector anyone expected." Ghost stood over Renner. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He just stood there and looked down at the man who had once been his whole world. And the expression in those dark eyes carried something heavier than anger. It was grief. The betrayal of a bond that was supposed to be unbreakable. Webb zip-tied Renner's wrists. Emily checked Reyes. Still stable, still sedated, still alive. Still breathing because a dog, a nurse, and a handful of men who refused to quit had held the line through the longest night of their lives. Her phone buzzed. "Torres. NCIS is pulling into the parking structure. 8 agents, full tactical authority. It's over, Carter." Emily read the message, read it again, let the words settle into her bones. It's over. She looked at Ghost. He had moved back to Reyes's bed. He was lying across the foot of it, chin on his paws, eyes finally showing something other than combat readiness. Exhaustion, relief, the weight of a mission that had demanded everything he had. Emily sat down on the floor with her back against the wall. She pulled her knees to her chest. She pressed her forehead against them, and she let her hands shake. She let the adrenaline drain. She let the last 6 hours catch up to her in one silent wave that crashed through her body and left her hollow and trembling and alive. Down the hallway, she heard the elevator doors open. Heavy footsteps, authoritative voices, the sound of federal agents moving with purpose and jurisdiction, and the full weight of the law. It was over. But Emily didn't move. Not yet. She stayed on that floor, in that room, with a sleeping dog and a breathing soldier, and she let herself be exactly what she was. Not a hero, not a warrior, not the woman with the tattoo who had stared down a corrupt doctor and 2 armed imposters and a man crawling through a ventilation shaft. Just a nurse, the one nobody saw coming. 2:09 a.m. The first NCIS agent through the elevator doors was a woman named Special Agent Diana Holt. Mid-50s, short gray hair, no makeup, no jewelry. She moved like someone who had walked into 100 crime scenes and stopped being impressed by any of them 20 years ago. Behind her, 7 agents spread through the surgical floor in pairs, quiet and efficient, securing access points and taking positions with a kind of coordinated silence that told Emily these people had done this before. Many times. Holt found Emily still sitting on the floor outside recovery room 6. She looked down at her, looked at the blood on Emily's scrub top, looked at Ghost through the open door, still curled at the foot of Reyes's bed. "You Carter?" Holt asked. "Yeah. Senior Chief Torres briefed me on the way in. You secured the evidence, blocked access to the patient, and detained an intruder who came through the ventilation shaft." "The dog detained him. I just held his other arm." Holt almost smiled. "Stand up, Carter. I need to debrief you." Emily stood. Her legs were stiff. Her hands had stopped shaking, but her body felt like it had been poured out of a mold and left to harden in the wrong shape. She followed Holt down the corridor to an empty consultation room. Webb stayed at his post outside Reyes's door. Ghost didn't move. Holt closed the door, pulled out a recorder, and set it on the table. "Walk me through everything. Start from when the medevac call came in." Emily talked for 43 minutes. She didn't leave anything out. The unprepared trauma bay, Briggs ordering the dog shot, the confrontation, Ghost recognizing her tattoo, the needle decompression, the 2 suited men with fake DOD badges, the phone call Briggs received at 11:31 p.m., Torres confirming the Meridian Logistics connection, the syringe of potassium chloride, the memory card she had hidden behind the television in Family Consultation Room C on the pediatric floor. Dale Renner crawling through the air vent, Ghost's recognition of his former handler. Everything. Holt listened without interrupting. When Emily finished, the agent turned off the recorder and sat back. "The memory card. You said you hid it on the pediatric floor. Behind the wall-mounted TV in Family Consultation Room C. Service panel on the back. There's a firmware update slot. I slid it in there." Holt pulled out her phone and made a call. "Collins. Pediatric floor. Family Consultation Room C. Television mounted on the wall. Back panel. Service port. You're looking for a micro SD card in a military-grade waterproof housing. Bag it. Chain of custody starts now." She hung up and looked at Emily. "That was smart thinking, the TV. I've hidden things before. I read your service record on the drive over. 38th Rescue Squadron, 4 deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart you never talked about." Emily said nothing. "You left the Air Force 5 years ago, honorable discharge, took a civilian nursing position at a VA hospital in Phoenix, transferred to Liberty Memorial 6 weeks ago. No disciplinary issues, no flags, you just disappeared into the system." That was the idea. Holt studied her for a long moment. "Why?" Emily looked at the table. A scratch in the laminate ran from one edge to the other like a fault line. She traced it with her finger. "Because I spent 4 years pulling broken people out of broken places. And when I came home, I couldn't figure out how to stop. I couldn't turn it off. I'd hear a helicopter and my hands would start moving before my brain caught up. I'd see a car accident on the freeway and I'd be out of my vehicle and running before I realized I wasn't in Helmand anymore. I left because if I didn't, I was going to lose whatever part of me was still a person and not just a response protocol." Holt nodded slowly. "And tonight? Tonight it all came back, every bit of it. And for the first time in 5 years, I wasn't afraid of it." 2:58 a.m. Holt's team worked fast. The 2 suited men were intercepted in the parking structure as they attempted to leave. Their vehicle contained 3 additional sets of forged federal credentials, a laptop with encrypted communications, and a portable hard drive wipe kit designed to destroy digital evidence. They were placed in separate vehicles and transported to the NCIS field office at Naval Base San Diego for interrogation. Dale Renner was treated for the bite wound on his hand by a very unhappy ER doctor who kept asking why there was a dog on the surgical floor. Webb stood over Renner the entire time, arms crossed, saying nothing, radiating the kind of quiet menace that made the ER staff work faster than they had ever worked in their lives. When the wound was dressed, Holt's agents took Renner into custody. Emily watched them walk him through the lobby. Renner's face was blank. Not defiant, not defeated, just empty. The face of a man who had crossed a line so long ago that he couldn't remember which side he had started on. As he passed the elevator bank, he turned his head toward the upper floors, toward the surgical wing, toward Ghost. His mouth moved. Emily couldn't hear the words, but she read his lips. "I'm sorry, boy." Ghost wasn't there to hear it. Ghost was still on Reyes's bed, still guarding, still doing the only thing that had ever made sense to him in a world that had asked him to do terrible things and rewarded him with nothing but the privilege of doing them again. 3:11 a.m. Holt found Emily in the staff break room on the second floor, sitting alone with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but Emily was holding it anyway because it gave her hands something to do besides shake. "Briggs is talking," Holt said. Emily looked up. "Already?" "Fastest confession I've seen in 22 years. The moment we told him we had the memory card and Renner was in custody, he folded. Started giving us everything. Names, dates, payment records, communication logs. He kept it all on a personal device in his office safe. Not encrypted, not even password protected. He didn't think he'd get caught. They never do. The arrogant ones are always the easiest to break. It's the true believers who hold out. Briggs isn't a true believer. He's a man who got in over his head and couldn't find his way back." Emily tightened her grip on the cold coffee cup. "How long has he been working for them?" 14 months. Meridian Logistics approached him through an intermediary, a medical consulting firm that offered him a contract for advisory services. $50,000 for the first year. The work was legitimate at first. Reviewing injury protocols for Meridian employees, signing off on workers' compensation claims, standard corporate medical consulting. And then it wasn't standard. 6 months in, they asked him to delay treatment on a Meridian contractor who had been injured at one of their facilities. The contractor had seen something he shouldn't have. Briggs delayed treatment for 4 hours. The man survived but developed complications that affected his memory. Meridian's legal team settled quietly. Briggs got a bonus of $100,000. Emily felt sick. Not the nausea that comes from shock, the deeper kind. The kind that settles into your understanding of the world and poisons something fundamental. A doctor, a man who had sworn an oath, a man who had stood in front of medical students and taught them to save lives. And he had sold that oath for a check. After that, Holt continued, Briggs was in too deep to walk away. Meridian had the payments on record. They had documentation of the delayed treatment. If Briggs tried to leave, they would expose him. So when they called tonight and told him a Navy SEAL was being medevaced to his hospital with evidence that could bring down their entire operation, Briggs agreed to make sure the patient didn't survive. He didn't just agree, Emily said. He actively sabotaged the trauma response. He didn't prep the bay. He ordered the dog killed to create more delay. He tried to override every intervention. And when all of that failed, he walked up to the OR with a syringe of potassium chloride. I know. That's not a man who was pressured, Agent Holt. That's a man who made a choice. Holt sat down across from her. You're right, and he's going to answer for it. Briggs is facing charges that will end his career and likely put him in a federal prison for the rest of his useful life. Attempted murder of a military officer, conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation, destruction of evidence, fraud. The list is going to get longer before it gets shorter. Emily set the coffee cup down. Her hands were steady now. And Meridian? That's where it gets bigger than one hospital and one dirty doctor. Holt leaned forward. The memory card your SEAL recorded contains 4 hours and 17 minutes of footage from inside Meridian's primary stateside facility in El Cajon. It shows crates marked as decommissioned ordnance being repackaged with live weapon systems, including components for shoulder-fired missile launchers and advanced targeting systems that are restricted under international arms control agreements. The footage captures serial numbers, faces of Meridian personnel, and shipping documents showing the weapons being routed through 3 intermediary ports before reaching end buyers in North Africa and the Middle East. Emily's breath caught. This isn't just fraud. No, this is an illegal arms pipeline operating on American soil under the cover of a Department of Defense logistics contract. Meridian has been doing this for at least 3 years. The value of the weapons they've moved is estimated at over $400 million. And the people buying them are not our friends. 3:27 a.m. Emily stood up from the table. She needed to move. Sitting still made the weight of it worse. $400 million in illegal weapons. American weapons. Sold to enemies of the country that built them. Facilitated by a company that shook hands with generals and signed contracts with the Pentagon and sent Christmas cards to Congressional Defense Committee members. And the only reason any of it had come to light was because one SEAL officer wouldn't stop asking questions, and one combat dog wouldn't leave his side. She walked back to the surgical floor. The lockdown had been lifted. NCIS had full control of the building. Agents were stationed at every entrance, every stairwell, every elevator. The night shift staff moved through the corridors with the wide-eyed, careful movements of people who understood that something enormous had happened around them and were still trying to figure out what. Emily stopped outside Recovery Room 6. Webb was still at the door. He looked like he hadn't moved in hours. He probably hadn't. "How is he?" Emily asked. "Stable. Nguyen checked on him 20 minutes ago. Vitals are strong." She said if everything holds, he might regain consciousness within 24 to 48 hours. Emily looked through the window. Reyes was still. Monitors beeping steady rhythms. IV drip running clean. And Ghost, still at the foot of the bed, chin on his paws, eyes half closed but not sleeping. Never fully sleeping. Always that thin edge of awareness that separates a resting dog from a combat dog. Webb. Yeah. The man in the vent, Renner. Ghost was his dog first. Webb exhaled slowly. Yeah, I know. Renner was part of the K9 program at Coronado before he transferred to the Interagency Training Unit. He was Ghost's primary handler for 18 months. Good handler, too. The dog bonded with him hard. When Renner left the Navy, Ghost was reassigned to Mick. It took months before Ghost fully accepted a new handler. Dogs like him, they don't switch loyalty easy. It's not a light switch. It's more like grief. They mourn the old bond while they learn the new one. And tonight Ghost attacked him. Yeah, Webb was quiet for a moment. That's the part that gets me. Ghost recognized Renner. I saw it in his eyes. He knew exactly who that man was. And he attacked him anyway. Because Renner was coming for Mick. And whatever Ghost felt about his old handler, his duty to his current handler was absolute. That's not training. Training can be overridden. What Ghost did tonight was a choice. Emily pressed her palm against the glass. Loyalty over memory. The hardest kind there is. 3:44 a.m. Emily's phone buzzed. A text from Torres. Downstairs. Need you. She took the elevator to the ground floor. Torres was standing in the main lobby with Holt and a man Emily hadn't seen before. Older, buzz cut, dressed blues with enough ribbons to wallpaper a room. His face carried the particular gravity of a man who had spent 30 years making decisions that cost or saved lives and had stopped pretending either one was easy. Carter, this is Captain William Harding, Commander, Naval Special Warfare Group 1. Harding extended his hand. Emily shook it. His grip was firm, but not performative. A handshake that meant something. Mr. Carter, I've just spent the last hour on secure communications with NCIS, the JAG Corps, and SOCOM headquarters at MacDill. What you did tonight is going to be classified. You understand what that means. It means I can't talk about it. It means officially none of this happened. Lieutenant Commander Reyes was injured during a training evolution. He was treated at Liberty Memorial and is recovering. That's the official record. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. And Meridian? Holt answered. Meridian logistics will be investigated and dismantled through classified federal channels. The evidence Reyes collected will be used, but it will never appear in a public courtroom. This will be handled internally, military justice, closed proceedings. And Briggs? Briggs will be prosecuted but under a sealed indictment. His medical license will be revoked. The specific charges will reference fraud and malpractice. The attempted murder charge will be prosecuted in a military tribunal since the victim is an active duty service member. So nobody will ever know what really happened here tonight. Harding looked at her with something that might have been empathy. The people who need to know will know, and the people responsible will answer for it. I give you my word on that. With respect, Captain, I've seen what happens to words when they go up the chain of command. They get edited, rewritten, classified into silence. Reyes almost died tonight because someone in the chain decided that weapon sales were more important than a SEAL's life. How do I know the next chain will be any different? Harding didn't flinch. He held her gaze with the steady, unflinching look of a man who had been asked hard questions by people with every right to ask them. You don't, he said. You have no guarantee. But I will tell you this. I have known Michael Reyes for 7 years. I was his commanding officer during his first deployment. I wrote his first fitness report. When I got the call tonight that he was in surgery with a gunshot wound, I drove from Coronado to this hospital at 100 miles an hour, and I have been on the phone since I arrived, making sure that every single person involved in hurting one of my men is going to spend the rest of their lives regretting it. That's not a promise from the chain of command. That's a promise from me. Emily searched his face. She was looking for the same things she always looked for. The micro expressions, the stress indicators, the tiny fractures in composure that reveal when a person is performing versus when they are real. She found nothing false. Okay, she said. 4:02 a.m. The hospital was beginning to shift. The night was ending. Not literally, not yet. Dawn was still 2 hours away. But the crisis was unwinding. NCIS had control. Briggs was in custody. The two suited imposters were being processed at the naval base. Renner was in a holding cell. The memory card was in an evidence bag inside a locked NCIS vehicle. Emily walked back upstairs alone. She moved through the corridors of Liberty Memorial the way she had moved through them for 6 weeks, quietly, invisibly, a figure in scrubs that the overhead lights barely seemed to notice. But something was different now. Not in the hospital. In her. She had spent 5 years running from who she was. 5 years trying to bury the Air Force pararescue jumper under layers of civilian life. Trying to sand down the edges that combat had sharpened. Trying to become someone who didn't hear helicopter rotors in her sleep or smell cordite when she closed her eyes. She had come to Liberty Memorial to disappear. To be nobody. To fill out paperwork and restock supply carts and go home to an empty apartment and convince herself that this was enough. That quiet was the same thing as peace. It wasn't. Quiet was just the absence of noise. Peace was something you had to earn. And Emily had been refusing to earn it because earning it meant accepting that the woman she had been, the woman who had crawled through fire and held dying men together with her bare hands, was not someone to run from. She was someone to honor. Tonight had not been a relapse. It had not been a regression. It had been a homecoming. Emily reached Recovery Room 6. Webb had been relieved by another SEAL operator she didn't recognize. The man nodded at her and stepped aside. She went in. Ghost lifted his head. His tail moved. Not a wag. Malinois don't wag the way other dogs wag. It was a slow, deliberate sweep, an acknowledgement. A greeting reserved for someone who had earned it. Emily sat in the chair beside Reyes's bed. The monitors beeped. The IV dripped. The ventilator hummed its mechanical lullaby. Reyes was still under, his body doing the slow, brutal work of putting itself back together. She looked at his hands, the calloused fingers, the torn cuticles. a thin white scar across his left palm that probably had a story attached to it. The kind of story SEALs tell over beers and never tell to anyone else. "You don't know me," she said quietly, "and when you wake up, you probably won't remember any of this. But I want you to know something. What you did was worth it. The risk you took, the evidence you brought back, it mattered. And the people who tried to bury it are going to answer for what they've done." She paused. "And your dog is a hero. You should know that too. He held the line when nobody else could. He stood over you and he did not move. And he made every person in this hospital understand that some bonds are not negotiable. He chose you. Over his training. Over his first handler. Over everything. He chose you." Ghost's ears perked at the sound of her voice. He stretched his front paws forward and rested his chin on Reyes's ankle. Emily leaned back in the chair. Exhaustion was settling into her bones now. Deep, marrow-level exhaustion. The kind that doesn't come from physical labor, but from hours of sustained hypervigilance. Hours of making decisions that carried the weight of life and death. Hours of being the person standing between chaos and catastrophe. She closed her eyes. 4:31 a.m. She didn't sleep. She floated in that space between consciousness and surrender, where the body rests, but the mind stays tethered to the world by a single thread of awareness. She could still hear the monitors, still feel Ghost's warmth at the foot of the bed, still smell the antiseptic in the copper and the faint, stubborn scent of gunpowder that clung to everything Reyes had brought into this hospital. Her phone buzzed. She opened one eye. Torres. "It's done. NCIS has full evidence custody. Meridian's El Cajon facility is being raided as we speak. FBI is involved now too. This thing is going to be big, Carter. Really big." Emily typed back with one thumb. "Good. Harding wants to talk to you again before he leaves. Tell him I'll be here. You should go home. Get some sleep." Emily looked at Ghost, looked at Reyes, looked at the machines keeping time with a human heart that had almost stopped beating 6 hours ago. "I'm good right here," she typed. She put the phone down. She settled back into the chair. Ghost's breathing had finally slowed to the deep, rhythmic cadence of a dog who was truly resting. Not on full alert, not scanning for threats. Resting. Because for the first time since he had arrived at Liberty Memorial on a medevac helicopter with his handler's blood on his fur, Ghost felt safe. Because someone was watching. Emily Carter. The nurse nobody noticed. The woman with the faded tattoo. The transfer that the chief of trauma had dismissed and the staff had overlooked and the system had filed away in a drawer marked unremarkable. She sat in that chair with her eyes half closed and her hands finally still, and she held the watch. Not because anyone asked her to, because that's who she was. It was who she had always been. 3 weeks passed. 21 days of machines breathing for Michael Reyes. 21 days of surgeons checking sutures, and nurses adjusting drip rates, and specialists reviewing scans and writing notes and charts that would be sealed and classified and locked away in federal archives where no journalist would ever read them. 21 days of Ghosts lying at the foot of a hospital bed, eating only when Emily brought food, sleeping only when Emily was in the room, and watching the door with the patience of a creature who understood time differently than humans did. For Ghost, time was not hours or days. Time was the space between the last moment his handler spoke and the next moment his handler would speak again. Everything in between was waiting, and Ghost was built to wait. Emily came every day, before her shift, after her shift, sometimes during her shift when she could slip away for 10 minutes without anyone noticing. She would sit in the chair beside Reyes's bed and check his vitals and talk to Ghost and say nothing to Reyes because there was nothing to say to a man who couldn't hear her. Or maybe he could. She had read the studies, coma patients, auditory processing, the brain's refusal to fully shut down even when the body demanded it. She didn't know if Reyes heard her. She talked anyway. She told him about the weather, about the food in the hospital cafeteria, about the new resident who kept calling Ghost the Wolf, and how Ghost had started ignoring anyone who used the wrong name. She told him about Torres checking in every day, about Webb rotating security shifts with two other operators she had come to know by first name. She told him about Holt calling her twice to clarify details for the federal case file. She told him everything except the thing she wanted to tell him most, which was that saving his life had saved hers. She wasn't ready to say that yet, not to an unconscious man, not to anyone. On the 14th day, Wen reduced the sedation. On the 16th day, Reyes was breathing on his own. On the 19th day, his fingers moved. Not a reflex this time, intentional. His right hand reached down toward the foot of the bed, searching, and Ghost was there in a heartbeat, pressing his muzzle into Reyes's open palm. And Emily watched from the doorway as a Navy SEAL's unconscious body found its dog and held on. She left the room before anyone saw her crying. On the morning of the 22nd day, Emily arrived for her shift at 6 a.m. She dropped her bag in her locker, changed into fresh scrubs, clipped her badge to her pocket, and walked to Recovery Room 6 the way she walked there every morning. The way her feet had learned the route so completely that she didn't need to think about it anymore. Webb was at the door, but he wasn't standing in his usual position. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and something on his face that Emily had never seen from him before. A smile. "He's awake," Webb said. Emily stopped walking. Her chest locked up. Her hands went still at her sides. She stood in that hallway and let those two words move through her the way a wave moves through water, lifting everything and setting it back down in a different place. "When?" she asked. "About 40 minutes ago. Nguyen was in with him. He opened his eyes, looked around, looked at Ghost, and the first thing out of his mouth was the dog's name." Emily almost laughed. Almost. Of course it was. The second thing he said was, "Who pulled me off the bird?" Nguyen told him she'd let someone else answer that. Webb stepped aside. Emily looked at the door. Her reflection stared back at her from the narrow window. Tired eyes, hair pulled back. The same face she had seen in mirrors for 5 years. The face of a woman who had learned to make herself. Something in the set of her jaw and the way she held her shoulders had changed in the last 3 weeks. So gradually she hadn't noticed until this exact moment. She didn't look small anymore. She pushed the door open. Reyes was sitting up, partially. The bed was angled at 30 degrees, and his left arm was immobilized, and his face carried the particular gray exhaustion of a man whose body had been through catastrophic trauma and was only now beginning to understand how much work recovery was going to demand. But his eyes were open, clear, alert. The eyes of not at the foot this time, right next to him, pressed against his good side with his chin resting on Reyes's thigh and his tail doing that slow, deliberate sweep that Emily had come to understand was the Malinois equivalent of pure, unguarded happiness. Reyes looked at her. Emily looked at him. And for 3 weeks of intubation had stripped it down to gravel and whisper. But underneath the damage, there was warmth. The kind of warmth that comes from a man who means what he says and doesn't say more than he means. Nguyen talks too much. Reyes almost smiled. It cracked his dry lips and he winced. Torres told me the rest. About Renner. About the vent. About you. Ghost looked at her with the same expression he always had when she was in the room. That particular softness behind the alertness. The look of a dog who had accepted a second person into the... Nguyen removed 2 bullet fragments and repaired a torn subclavian artery. You lost almost 40% of your blood volume. The fact that you're talking to me right now is a medical achievement that Nguyen will be bragging about for the rest of her career. She already started. She came in this morning and told me I was her finest work. Then she told me if I ever got shot again, she'd finish the job herself. Emily laughed. A real laugh. The kind that surprised her because she couldn't remember the last time she had made that sound. Reyes watched her laugh. His eyes changed. Something moved behind them. Not romantic, not dramatic. Something simpler. Recognition. The way one person who has been through the fire looks at another person who has been through the fire and understands, without words, without explanation, that they share a language nobody else speaks. Torres told me about your tattoo, Reyes said. 38th Rescue Squadron. Emily touched her left arm through the scrub sleeve. The ink she had carried for 12 years. The ink that had opened a door that saved his life. That's how you got past Ghost, Reyes said. He smelled it on you, the PJ scent. Cordite and JP8 and field trauma kits. He's been around enough rescue operators to know what that combination means. He didn't just smell it, Emily said. He understood it. That dog knows the difference between someone who has been in the fire and someone who hasn't. I could have shown him any tattoo in the world. It wouldn't have mattered if the scent didn't match. Reyes looked down at Ghost. He put his good hand on the dog's head, and Ghost closed his eyes and leaned into the touch, with a weight that said everything about what the last 3 weeks had cost him. The waiting, the uncertainty, the primal terror of a bonded animal who didn't know if his person was ever coming back. He chose you, Reyes said quietly, in the trauma bay, when he let you through. That wasn't him standing down. That was him choosing to trust you with my life. Ghost doesn't do that, not with anyone, not since Renner. Emily heard the name and felt the room shift. Renner, Ghost's first handler, the man who had crawled to a ventilation shaft to kill the person he had once been sworn to protect. Reyes saw it on her face. Yeah, they told me about Renner too. I'm sorry. Don't be. Renner made his choice a long time ago. I just didn't see it. None of us did. Reyes was quiet for a moment. His hand kept moving on Ghost's head, slow circles, the unconscious gesture of a man who draws comfort from the constant presence of his dog. When they assigned Ghost to me, he was a mess, not aggressive, not disobedient, just closed off. He did everything by the book, followed every command, hit every mark, but there was nothing behind it. Like he was going through the motions. The trainer said he was fine, mission ready, but I could see it. He was grieving. For Renner? For the bond. Dogs like Ghost, they don't bond with a person the way a pet bonds with an owner. It's deeper than that. It's more like what a child feels for a parent. Absolute. Unconditional. When that bond breaks, it doesn't just hurt. It rewires them. They have to learn how to trust again from zero. How long did it take? Reyes closed his eyes. 7 months. 7 months of sleeping next to him, feeding him, training with him, talking to him, letting him set the pace. 7 months before he fell asleep touching me for the first time. That was the moment I knew he had come back. Emily looked at Ghost, the dog who had stood over a dying man and refused the world. The dog who had recognized a scent on a stranger's skin and made the hardest kind of choice. The dog who had attacked the first person he ever loved because the second person he ever loved was in danger. He's the bravest one in this room, Emily said. He always is, Reyes said. The door opened. Torres stepped in. He looked different than he had 3 weeks ago. Less operational, more human. The adrenaline and the mission focus had given way to something softer. The look of a man visiting a friend who almost died and being quietly overwhelmed by the fact that he didn't. You look terrible, Torres said to Reyes. You look old, Reyes replied. Torres grinned. He pulled up a second chair and sat down, and for a moment, the three of them were just people in a room, breathing the same air, sharing the particular kind of silence that only exists between those who have survived something together. Holt called this morning, Torres said. The raid on Meridian's El Cajon facility produced 17 arrests. They seized over 300 crates of weapons in various stages of repackaging. The shipping routes Mick identified led to secondary facilities in Houston and Norfolk. FBI is executing warrants on both locations as we speak. How high does it go? Reyes asked. Torres hesitated, just for a beat. High. Meridian's CEO, a man named Arthur Cross, was arrested at his home in La Jolla at 4 o'clock this morning. He's being charged under the Arms Export Control Act and about 15 other statutes I can't pronounce. 3 DoD officials are under investigation for facilitating the logistics contracts that gave Meridian access to military shipping channels. 3 DoD officials, Emily repeated. Minimum. Holt thinks it could go higher. The investigation is being run jointly by NCIS, FBI, and the DoD Inspector General. This is the kind of case that makes careers and ruins them in equal measure. Reyes absorbed that. His jaw tightened. Not satisfaction, something more complicated. The look of a man who had uncovered a rot so deep that exposing it brought no joy, only the grim relief that it was finally visible. "What about Renner?" Reyes asked. Torres glanced at Emily. She nodded. "Renner is cooperating. Full confession. He was recruited by Meridian 18 months ago. They offered him $200,000 a year plus benefits to run security operations for their domestic facilities. When Mick started poking around, Renner was assigned to handle it. He was the one who identified Mick's unauthorized visit to the El Cajon facility. He was the one who gave the order to stop him. He gave the order to shoot me," Reyes said, not a question. "Yes." Reyes looked at Ghost. The dog had opened his eyes when Renner's name was spoken. His ears were forward, alert, listening, understanding more than any of them would ever know. "Ghost attacked him," Reyes said, "in the vent." "Ghost did what he was trained to do," Emily said. "He protected his handler. He attacked the man who raised him. Because that man was coming to kill you. And Ghost decided, in that moment, that his loyalty to you was stronger than his history with Renner. That's not just training, Reyes. That's character." Reyes was quiet for a long time. His hand rested on Ghost's back. The dog's breathing was slow and steady, calm, the calmest Emily had ever seen him. "I owe you my life," Reyes said. He was looking at Emily when he said it. "That's not a figure of speech. I'm not being polite. Every person in this building told me the same thing. If you hadn't gotten past Ghost, I would have died in that trauma bay. If you hadn't decompressed my chest, I would have coded before I reached the OR. If you hadn't hidden the memory card, everything I risked my life for would have been destroyed. And if you hadn't stopped Briggs outside the operating room, I would have died on the table with a needle in my IV, and nobody would have ever known the difference." Emily's throat tightened. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor and took a breath and let it go. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "That's not how this works." "Then how does it work?" "You were in trouble. I was there. I did what I'm trained to do, same as you would have done, same as Ghost did. That's it." Reyes studied her, the same way Ghost had studied her in the trauma bay, with an intensity that didn't miss anything. "Torres told me you were offered reinstatement, federal service, full rank restoration. They want you back." Emily nodded slowly. "Captain Harding made the call himself. The Air Force is willing to reactivate my commission, full pararescue status, fast track to a leadership position within the 38th. That's a hell of an offer." "It is." "You turned it down." Emily looked at him. "How did you know?" "Because you're still wearing scrubs." She almost smiled. "I turned it down this morning, called Harding at 0500 and told him thank you, but no." "Why?" Emily thought about the answer. She had been thinking about it for 3 weeks, turning it over in her mind during the long hours sitting in this chair, watching Ghost breathe, watching Reyes's monitors trace the slow rhythm of a man coming back to life. "Because I spent 4 years in combat being the person who shows up when everything falls apart. And I was good at it. I was damn good at it. But I came home broken. Not the kind of broken you can see, the kind that lives in your chest and makes you flinch at sounds that shouldn't scare you and pulls you out of sleep at 3 in the morning, reaching for gear that isn't there. I left the Air Force because I thought the only way to heal was to stop being that person." She paused. Ghost lifted his head and looked at her. just looked, steady, present. But what I learned these past 3 weeks is that I was wrong. I don't need to stop being that person. I need to find a place where that person belongs. And this hospital, this job, these people, this is where I belong. Not because it's safe, not because it's easy, because every day someone comes through those doors who is hurt and scared and alone. And they need someone who knows what it feels like to be all three of those things and still keep going. She straightened in the chair. I'm staying at Liberty Memorial, not as the nurse nobody sees, as the person I actually am. And if that makes people uncomfortable, if they don't know what to do with a pararescue veteran who chooses to work a nurse's station, that's their problem, not mine. Reyes reached out with his good hand. Emily looked at it, then she took it. His grip was weak. 3 weeks of unconsciousness had stripped the strength from his fingers, but the intention behind it was unbreakable. Thank you, he said, for everything. Emily squeezed his hand once and let go. Thank your dog. He did the hard part. Ghost's tail swept the bedsheet. Once. Slow. Deliberate. 2 weeks later, Emily was standing at the nurse's station on a Tuesday morning when the elevator doors opened and Ghost walked out. He was in full tactical harness. Clean. Polished. The GoPro mount was empty now, the camera long since entered into evidence. He walked with the confident, purpose-driven gait of a working dog who knew exactly where he was going and why. Behind him, on a leash he barely needed, walked Torres. Someone wanted to say goodbye, Torres said. Emily came around the nurse's station and knelt down. Ghost walked straight to her. He didn't stop at arm's length. He didn't wait for permission. He pressed his body directly into hers and pushed his head under her chin and leaned. 70 pounds of war and loyalty and something that defied every clinical definition of animal behavior. Leaning into a woman in scrubs in a hospital hallway like she was the only solid ground in the world. Emily wrapped her arms around him. She buried her face in the fur behind his ears, and she held him, and she felt his heartbeat against her chest. Strong, steady, alive. He's going back to active duty, Torres said. Reyes is still in recovery, so Ghost will be temporarily assigned to another handler at the K9 unit until Mick is cleared. 6 months, maybe 8. He'll wait, Emily said into Ghost's fur. Yeah, he will. Emily pulled back. She held Ghost's face in both hands and looked into his eyes. Dark, deep, eyes that had seen things that would break most humans and had come out the other side with something that wasn't hardness and wasn't softness, but was something in between, something earned. You did good, she told him. You did so good, buddy. And when Reyes is ready, you're going to go back to him, and you're going to do what you do. And somewhere out there, on some dark night, in some place nobody talks about, you're going to save another life. Because that's who you are. Ghost held her gaze. Then he licked her face. One time. A single, deliberate act of affection from a dog who did not give affection casually. Emily laughed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and stood up. Torres handed her a small box. From Mick, he said you'd understand. Emily opened it. Inside, on a bed of cotton, was a challenge coin. NavySEAL, Trident insignia. On the back, hand-engraved in small, precise letters, were 4 words. That others may live. Her motto, the Para-Rescue Creed. Engraved on a SEAL's coin. A bridge between 2 worlds that were never as different as they pretended to be. Emily closed the box. She pressed it against her chest. She looked at Torres and nodded because she didn't trust her voice. Torres nodded back. He clicked his tongue once, and Ghost turned and walked beside him toward the elevator. The dog's nails clicked on the tile. Steady, measured. The sound of a soldier going back to war. At the elevator, Ghost stopped. He turned his head and looked back at Emily one last time. She raised her hand. Ghost held the look for 2 seconds. Then he turned, walked into the elevator, and the doors closed. Emily stood in the hallway of Liberty Memorial Trauma Center. Around her, the hospital moved in its endless rhythm. Phones ringing, pages overhead, gurneys rolling. The ordinary, relentless, sacred machinery of keeping people alive. She stood in the middle of it, and she was not invisible. She was not forgotten. She was not the quiet nurse nobody noticed. She was Emily Carter, pararescue, trauma nurse, the woman who had walked toward a war dog when everyone else walked away. The woman who had knelt on a cold floor and offered her arm to an animal who understood sacrifice better than most humans ever would. The woman who had stood between a dying man and the people trying to kill him and had not moved. Not once, not an inch. She put the challenge coin in her scrub pocket, picked up her clipboard, and went back to work. Because heroes don't wait for the battlefield. Sometimes the battlefield finds them in the quietest room, on the quietest night, in the place where nobody is watching. And sometimes the one nobody sees is the only one still standing when everything falls apart.